Okay, everybody, this is Aaron the Pedantic. I am going to go a little bit more thoroughly into what exactly Helvexia is. I did a flip through, and it was really hard for me to read it just because of the way that I had my camera set up and all that kind of stuff. But I've actually had a really good chance to dig into what exactly you're dealing with here. And I got to say, this thing is, I think it's really cool. Um, so we have a very fantastic forward here from Gabor Lux, who is the author, and he just kind of lays down exactly what he was trying to accomplish. I think that perhaps the most well, this section right here is pretty cool. It's just a list of what happened to the different player characters that were involved in his game, which I really appreciate. So you do have a what is role playing kind of thing going on here, and it's useful. The way that it's described, it's really genuinely as if people have not played before, and maybe that is something that could be useful in certain circles. I'm sure that most people, they probably get the idea. So basically what you have here is a d20 plus modifier versus DC skill system. And well, I mean, just conflict resolution overall is usually handled through that. And it doesn't bloat in the way that I have typically not liked in a lot of those games. And it is very straightforward. If it's something that's should be normal for them to accomplish something, and there are some things listed here that you should follow, consider would fall into that category. It's just a 12. So they are really going to be about it's going to be about 50-50 for quite a few of the characters, unless they're skilled, and then it's going to be a little bit more than that. The reason I say 50-50 is because of something you'll see in just a minute, which may shock you. We'll see. And as for hard, it truly is hard. That's whenever you really do need to be skilled in something. You may want to be higher level and all that kind of stuff. So you have an example of play here, which I have to say, like, one of the things that I'm really appreciating is just the voice that he uses throughout. It has a very jovial and silly nature, even though it's very formal, and it comes across greatly. Now I will say this: he really has no holds barred with regard to how he talks about things, and I really do appreciate that. He's really kind of in your face about certain things. I'm not going to go too deep into it, really, but let's just say that he's not really too worried about people being mad at him. This section here that describes the meaning of picaresque, this fully encapsulates what exactly he was trying to do here, what he's shooting for, and this is what separates Helvexia from, I would say, Lion and Dragon, for instance, which I love Lion and Dragon, and I'm loving this right now, but they are very different beasts, and this is kind of why. So the whole thing about that here is that the focus of what exactly you're going to be zooming in on, as a game master, is you're not going to be focusing on the nitty gritty details. And that's something that I absolutely do focus on with Lion and Dragon. I try to focus on the world stage and all those kinds of things because you're dealing with people in the middle of the War of the Roses. You could zoom in more on a smaller scale and all that kind of stuff, and do some day in the life medieval kinds of things. However, the thing about the picaresque here is that the focus is going to be more on this style of pulp literature from back yonder days. And before Appendix N, usually when we talk about pulp literature and we're talking about RPGs, usually we're talking about the 70s and 80s fantasy writing. This is not quite that. This is a little bit further back. It pulls in a lot of really cool things. The Grimm's fairy tales, for one, is an inspiration. Basically, you're going to have some characters that are with very dubious morals a lot of times, which is interesting because morality has a very strong focus in this game. And they are going to be just doing a lot of action-packed stuff a lot. So you do have things recommended here that involve encounter checks and stuff like that. You do have the old school underpinnings of that nature. However, the focus is a lot more on these characters that the players are going to portray in this world that's just kind of absurd a lot of times. There are a lot of shady characters, even in the clerical orders and things like that. Society's just kind of screwy. And the characters are going to be bizarre and kind of out there, not in the newfangled modern role-playing game sense, but more in the not exactly the way that you might portray historical role-playing. This is more something that is entangled with folklore, even though there is a lot of great information here to try and keep it where it has a tinge of historical accuracy. Though he says often that you shouldn't let historical accuracy take away from what could be a memorable experience because of the fact that it's trying to emulate that particular genre of literature. And I think it's really cool. I mean, there are a lot of the gameplay examples that are included here are just kind of wild. So you have a list of what exactly makes things picaresque in the mind of the author. So he says the story is told in first person and is usually autobiographical. Consider players speaking in the name of their characters. So this is the description of how it is in the literary genre. And next it says the protagonist is a scoundrel of low birth or at least rank, surviving by his wits in the absence of status and industry. There's no overarching plot. So that's something, of course, I appreciate. The action, sorry, it's hard for me to read from this far, and I'm trying not to get in on the camera. The action consists of several loosely connected or even structureless adventures or episodes, typically in the form of a travelogue. So it's episodic, and this is the kind of the thing that I was trying to lean toward. This is when you would end the session, hopefully at the end of an adventure, or you would end an adventure, and then you would probably pick up on the next one. What is the next hook that's hitting them right away? When there may be some housekeeping duties and things like that that I would do a lot more often. I'm not saying that that's not the intention here, but it does seem that the focus is a little bit deeper on just getting to the action. And it talks about how the Three Musketeers is a good indication. There's almost always something happening. There's almost always something going on. People are getting insulted and dueling each other to the death. There are, and then you pull from the more fairy tale things where you have people that are dealing with the devil, gambling. And as a player, you can actually do that. You can actually do that. I will get to that. Okay. There is little character development. An adventurer does not change his nature merely by ill or good fortune and does not settle down to become an average citizen. So, I mean, that kind of flies in the face of what a lot of people try to do with modern role playing is they want to have the character arc. In this, that's not really what you're after. They're just trying to survive. They're just kind of who they are. There are sliding scales on morality and things like that, but it's just not quite the same. The story is told in a plain, often vernacular style, and even in a romance, it eschews idealism, which is a pretty interesting concept. There is a there's a strong element of satire. Society is typically depicted as corrupt and sanctimonious. Picaresque scoundrels are sinners, but rarely reprobate criminals. They are people of questionable morals who exist on the fringes of society and mostly come across as sympathetic outsiders, not monsters. So it's definitely a different tone than what I would usually associate with something set in the medieval period. And I'm really falling in love with that personally. There is an appendix, basically their version of an appendix in. I can't remember exactly what it's called there, but he recommends some certain things to read, and I really am interested in giving a lot of them some more thought. The design principles here are really pretty great. I'm glad that he included them because a lot of times we sit here and argue about what exactly was the intent and all that kind of stuff. Here it's all laid out, and this is a great selling point for not necessarily this being in the book, but this just being a way to let people know what exactly he was trying to accomplish, so you know that this style of play is something that you'd be interested in. So first is a quick generalist characters. So what he means by that is that they can be quickly generated in 30 minutes or less, usually 15 minutes if you're good at this kind of stuff. And generalist as in, yes, they do have a class system, but at the same time, your cleric, your student, which is basically the wizard or magic user, both of them are fairly competent at fighting in a way that in the BX vein, you don't really have quite that. You're not quite that capable. Every character is at least mildly competent in fighting, and there is a skill system, and your characters do get to choose some skills depending on what your class is. And then there are some things that you can try just about anything anyway, unless it's a very specific skill, like something that would be only accessible to someone who is a cleric because they have that kind of training. But generally speaking, most characters can try most stuff. Now, typically this is something I would hold against it, but again, this is not really trying to be D&D. This is trying to be something else. You can definitely have some raiding of tombs and stuff like that in this game, and I would highly suggest that you do so. I think that that's probably going to be part of what I have going on, but I feel like a lot of this is more going to be just strange happenings whenever they're just going about their business. At least partially. It's going to be that. It's going to be just kind of drama that builds up throughout the game. And I say drama, I don't mean like acting out drama. I just mean that the things that they accomplish are going to have repercussions in the world. And those things are going to feed back into each other. And then on top of that, you're going to constantly be injecting a lot of strange elements that are very folklorish. And it's almost just kind of part of everyday life in a way. So then you have closed advancement scale. So what I think is very interesting about this is he has character levels 1 to 6. 6 is the absolute cap for everything. There is nothing that goes above level 6. So everything is fairly lethal. However, your character starts at level 2. This is his recommendation. And not only that, but they also start with a full hit die of HP from level 1. And not only that, but they also are kind of generous in stat generation. You roll 4d6, you drop the lowest, but you go straight in a row. So it is oracular, but it's not quite as, I would say, your characters are going to be more competent than a typical BX character. So again, this isn't trying to be D&D though. This is trying to be, you're playing these characters that are rather competent adventurers that are capable of a lot of really cool things. And they're going to probably go through some interesting adventures together. And there is a good chance that a lot of them will die. Death is still a prominent feature. It's just that it's not as likely as it is in Mold Bay. That's just kind of just how it is. And as I said before, the characters are also a little bit more capable in a broad spectrum than they are in basic D&D. The magic system. So the magic system is kind of Vancian in a way, kind of not. There are some stipulations here. So depending on how high your stats are, you can get bonus spells, even if you're not even the class necessarily, but it becomes a lot more difficult to utilize that stuff. I kind of like this because it allows you to kind of dabble into the occult arts and the divine ways in a way. But it is severely weakened compared to what a cleric can accomplish or what a student can accomplish. Additional to that, the way that they get their magic, the way that their magic works is a little bit different. So one of the things that the cleric has to do in order to get their spells back, they don't just pray anywhere, and they can't just get any of their spells back. What they have to do is they have to meditate or pray at the appropriate place. So what this means is that if you are off on an adventure and you are in some kind of location that is far removed from any kind of church or holy sites or anything like that, then once you use one of your spells, it's gone. You're not getting it back. You have to return to a place where you can properly meditate in order to do it. I actually really enjoy this. Now, one of the things that it also does is it says that if you've not memorized a spell into that spell slot, then you can use healing. However, you can only do that, and it only comes back after Mass on Sunday. And there are a lot of things that are very tied into the culture. It makes no attempt to be something that you could just use in any kind of setting. This is very specifically medieval Switzerland with fantasy stuff going on. And I think that's really cool. I think that's really cool. It's a very specific situation, but to me, I love it. And there are definitely rules that you can parse. You can parse from this and take them elsewhere, absolutely. But the flavor is just wonderful, in my opinion. The student, in a similar way, does not work quite the same either. They are incredibly dependent on material components in a way that you are not otherwise. So it's not quite to the extent that Lion and Dragon is, but it's kind of close in a way. So you do have this Vancian magic, but you need the components to cast the spells. And the spells are very potent, and some of them are very creative. So you do have some that are just kind of direct from D&D. You do have like Burning Hands. You do have Bless, but they are a little bit different. Each of them are a little bit different, and then there are a lot that I've never even heard that there's such a thing in D&D. So I could be wrong, but I'll just give you a couple examples. So there is one spell that a student can learn, which is basically they can touch you and make your lungs start turning to liquid, basically. And then all you can do is cough and hack and all that stuff. I don't believe it will kill you, if I read it correctly, but the fact that you can do that to somebody means that you can kill them, because they have to make saves in order to even do something as much as speak, or not even speak. I would say it's attack, or anything more arduous than that. There is a spell, and so that one's a little bit more along the lines of, yeah, I could see that in D&D. But here's a curveball. So you have another one, is a level 1 cleric spell, and it is the Bell of Goodwill, I believe it's called. And what it does is you cast it on someone, you touch them, you cast it on them, and then for the rest of the day, anytime they think about committing a sin, a floating bell that is only visible to them will ring in order to remind them, hey, you're about to sin. And that's because sinning is actually a very strong part of the game. Some people may be turned off by that, and I get that. But for me, that's a great, great turn on, because of the fact that the players are going to be thinking very intently on every action they do. And there are some really cool ways that you are instructed to, not instructed, but you just kind of have to think about everything very different than how you usually do with your basic fantasy role-playing games. So so the magic system is different, but it's familiar. So just consider that. If you don't want to use it the way it's written, you absolutely don't have to. I do appreciate that you get the spells back that you can get as a cleric are dependent on where you go. So you actually have to find a place that will have those spells. You kind of have to pour through the scrolls of the church. It's not something that you take with you. And as for the student, you get those randomly at first, and the rest of them you just have to get as you go along. So fortune favors the bold. So basically, this is what I was talking about earlier, where even a beginning character can hope to make an attempt with a decent chance of success on several things, most things. But there still is a threshold where this is for the skilled characters up here at this threshold. That will happen. Easy come, easy go. So basically, your characters are going to go through rises and falls, and that's just built in a lot of ways. And there are really a lot of intricate things going on that facilitate that. But it's also and like I said, these are design principles. So that's really what that's addressing more so than just the tone. So you have a fast, open-ended combat system. It's really not anything unlike you've probably experienced with BX. In comparison to anything beyond that, it is very simple. And there are a few little house rules and things like that. I consider them house rules, at least in terms of BX clone that has its own stuff involved. It is very much in line with BX, but with ascending armor class, with a skill system that is very simple, with some other little features here and there, like exploding dice on certain types of weapons. A lot of weapons have particular qualities that apply to them that make it where they're more interesting to use in certain situations and things like that. So it is very familiar. It is very familiar. And one of the things I keep on getting way ahead of actual what I'm going to turn to, but there's just a lot of really cool stuff there. Virtue, I've already mentioned that it's pivotal, but basically if you have too high of virtue, you can't learn student spells. If you have too low of virtue, you can't learn cleric spells. And if you're a cleric who gets too low virtue, you can never become a cleric again, but you can become a student. So it kind of emulates the idea that you are this priest of some kind who turned to the dark side and is now forever forbidden to return to the light in a way. And you can become the dark cultist that you may have despised in years past. Yes, that sounds like character development, but that's not really. It's just it's just a rule that's there. It's not really saying that that's like something that you should try to do or anything like that. So episodic adventures, I already kind of mentioned that. And then at the bottom it just says that this all should be considered guidance, which some people require you saying that. So here you have some. It's a recommended reading section, and it involves some TV shows. It involves some books. It's got it's got stuff from Michael Moorcock. It's got a movie from Roman Polanski. Has Clark Ashton Smith, which we're used to seeing those names. We have a lot of people I can't pronounce. We have the Three Musketeers. We have the Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm books, or stories rather. There are quite a few things there, and I always appreciate whenever they have those influences and things like that. And he goes through quite a bit to make sure you understand what exactly you're going to be looking at here. So character generation, like I said, it's 46, drop the lowest, straight down. He says do it twice and pick the one that you like more. So the reason for that, I would imagine, is that if somebody just really doesn't want to play a cleric, the likelihood that they're going to have a high wisdom character twice that's bad at everything else is very unlikely. And it also kind of takes care of if your party has nothing but one thing. That is probably still not an enormous issue in this game, because I will say that class niche is not something that is entirely necessary to a great degree. It is something I usually defend to the death, but this isn't quite D&D, and like I said, it's not quite trying to be. So I feel a little bit better about it. Now, some may say, why do classes in the first place? I think probably just because it's a lot less clunky than adding a whole bunch of feats and features and stuff for you to just pick a whole bunch of things and construct a character together. And really, that's kind of where you land. So I understand, I think, where he went with that, and especially the fact that it's easy for us to understand coming from D&D background. So you have the 3 to 18 spread of what your stats can be. The modifiers are the basic -3 to +3 spread. Here you have just like what stats you were required to have in order to get bonus spells, what the stats do. All that is pretty basic. That all is pretty basic. So you do that, and then you get to choose a class. Well, you get to choose what nation are you from? Are you German? Are you French? Are you Italian? Are you Czech? Are you Dutch? Are you English? Are you a Gypsy? Are you Hungarian? Are you Jewish? Which it always strikes me as strange whenever I see that among you. Forget that. A list of like what is clearly national groups for the most part. I'm just like, what? But Cossacks, Poles, Spaniards, Swedes. Those are my people, at least among this group. So you choose that, and well, I guess I should have mentioned there are particulars that come with that, and I do like that because it kind of emphasizes the differences in cultures, and these are real life cultures that you can learn a lot about that are not fantasy cultures, and you can allow what you know from the real world to fill in blanks in a way that is perhaps more accessible to some people. But if you are an American like me who's not, so if you're an American like me, but you're not that very, very proficient in understanding different cultures from the medieval era and stuff like that, then you may still have to do some research, but it's in here. So there is that. As far as classes go, the leveling system is very simple. So you get XP for surviving encounters. So actually, let me double check that. Let's see. EXP. I'm just going to make sure I didn't get that wrong. Experience points can be received for good and especially for successful ideas, for defeating challenges and opponents, survival, meeting objectives on an individual group basis, and for partying expensively or spending good money on frivolous pursuits. Okay. Yeah, so there can be a lot of reasons that they get XP. There can be a lot of reasons for it. They learn, let's see, they learn and gain experience. They also become more adept at okay, yeah. So I was just making sure there wasn't something that I was completely missing. But yeah, so you do get XP for a lot of things. Pretty much whatever you would like to give them XP for. They have, I mean, there is a bestiary in here. I'm going to go through that some other time. But so you start at level 2 with 2,000 XP. Then you need 4,000. Then you need 6,000. Then you need 8,000. Then you need 10,000. And then you're done. There is no more leveling after that. So you have your 4 main archetypes, but then you also have it broken up into. He calls them archetypes. The things after that. So it's pretty much how you expect. The fighter is going to get some better saving throws in certain categories. The cleric's going to get better certain in that kind of thing. There is a 3 saving throw system. It is deafness, bravery, and temptation. Interestingly enough, they're kind of strange. It is a little strange, but it is what it is. I'm still kind of coming to terms on that. You have ascending armor class, so you just have kind of basic attack bonuses. The fighters, theirs are going to be better. There are rules in here for multi-classing, but I wouldn't bother really. It's not that complicated, to be honest, but I just wouldn't do it. So you get some basic things for your class, and then you get some more specific things for the more specific thing that you choose. So for fighter, you get to choose a specialization. So it could be soldier, it could be weapon master. And if you look at this, it's not a very long list of what you get for it. It's just a couple little features, and it makes them a little bit different. And it's kind of like with the race, it's not the race, the nationality thing. I say race just because typically it's race class, so it's more like culture class, I would say. So the vagabond is your thief, and as you can see, the thief is not getting a D4 of hit points. The fighter was getting a D10. The vagabond here gets a D8. And as I said, they start with 8 plus whatever a D8 you roll for second level. That's what they start with. So they're going to be kind of tough, a lot more so than in BX, which is going to change the way that they play the game, perhaps for the better. This is perhaps not a game where they are going to play incredibly cautiously to the extent that they're checking every little thing for traps all the time. It doesn't really lend itself quite to the dungeon crawl aesthetic from my perspective, but he may say otherwise. I actually am going to be interviewing the author at some time in the near future and try and get more information about things. But it sounds more like they were going around and traveling and finding treasure and stuff, sure, but just fighting people and getting into little scrapes and dealing with civilization, running into demons and just weird creatures and stuff. So your vagabond, they can be really, really agile. They can be better at initiative. They can be really good at legends. They can be good at sneaking and attacking from sneak attack kind of thing. They can be extremely lucky. They can get more skills. So there's a lot of things there to choose from. Your cleric is not going to be able to use heavy armor because, again, this is trying to emulate the priesthood of the era. So they are not going to wear armor. They are not going to attack somebody offensively. They're not going to try and kill anybody. They're going to try and defend themselves if they have to. They're going to use clubs. They're going to use blunt objects. So the cleric it's a different beast, but they also have a lot of things that they have to live by. They have to spread the Lord's peace. They have to be obedient to higher ups. They have to be celibate. They have a lot of expectations on them. I do want to ask Gabor exactly how he would work with having a cleric that is among some scoundrels and what exactly that's going to look like. So I will get to that. I will ask him. But if I had to make any assumptions, I would say that they're a priest, but maybe they're not the best priest. They're not going to kill anybody, but they may be a little crooked. And I mean that is what he said he was going for, is that society is a little bit corrupt, at the very least. So they will start with some spells depending on what church they come from and all that kind of stuff. They can do healing, which I already discussed. They can do exorcisms, and they can get their doctorate. So they are scholars, and eventually they can get retainers, and they can learn more science and things like that. There's a very interesting integration with the clerics and science, and it seems that the students are just those who have nothing to do with the church. They're not sanctioned by the church like the clerics are to do any kind of magic, and they are just they're the ones that have all the fun as far as that goes. But the student is a little bit weaker, so they can use any weapons that they like, which I do think is nice, but they can only use light armor, which I guess is really not very different from the cleric. It's just that they have less HP. The student is going to start with some different science skills and knowledge kind of things that they can integrate. The system doesn't go into deep detail as to what those sciences are, how they're applied. It really seems like you're not meant to have to worry that much about having to resort to the book for that in particular. There's detail when it comes to your spells and things like that. But as far as what is my astrology going to be useful for, there's some things built in, but not a whole lot of things built in with a lot of them. So that is something to be aware of. You will have to make rulings. You will have to be a game master. So I hope that you're ready for that. So they are definitely going to be carriers of spell books. They can carry around the gigantic tome, but it's freaking heavy, and if they lose it, then they're in some serious crap. They can carry around, some pamphlets with just a few low-level spells. It has those kind of considerations are in effect. So it's basically the bigger the arsenal that you're bringing with you, the bigger the book you need. Typically, the more expensive it probably is going to cost to keep it up as well. So they can also go for their doctorate eventually, and once they do so, this is what they do at 6th level. They can create their own spells, and they are forever named after them. So it kind of has that old Vancian vibe with that anyway. So this is how the skills work. There are basically what you are going to do is you have to determine how many skills you get. That is going to be affected by intelligence. It's going to be affected by what culture you're from, what class you have, all that kind of stuff. But everybody is supposed to start with 3. And so you can choose from a list unless there are certain conditions. So as you see on the skill list on the right, skills in italics can only be chosen by vagabond, skills in bold by students and clerics. So your learned stuff is blocked off from your dopes, and your sneaky grabby stuff is blocked off from your people that are just not that agile. So I've already kind of gone through all that, but whenever you do choose a skill, then what you do is you apply your level and your ability bonus in order to make the roll. So for instance, let's say that I have the balance skill. So I have the balance skill. It is a dexterity thing. So I have a +2 in dexterity. I'm a level 4 character. So I'm going to add +6 to my balance roll. And now you can see where it doesn't really take too much to get a 12, right? Because 12 is normal. So if I'm, I have a 30% chance of, I have 25% chance of failure. Yeah, 25% chance of failure on that roll, which is pretty insignificant whenever you think about it. But whenever you're looking at a more difficult thing, then I'd have to roll a 12. And you're starting to see how the math is kind of adding up. That means that even when you are 6th level, you're still looking at having to roll like an 11 in order to accomplish something that's very hard. So that is how that works. There are a lot of skills here. But as I said, you get a little bit of information on what exactly they do. But unless there's certain things that are a little bit more intense than others, but most of them aren't. Like the craft skill has some particular things because it involves making things. But for the most part, it's fairly straightforward. And I like the fact that there is a gambling skill on here particular, and it does come in later because it is very important. So next you have the scientific disciplines. As I said, there's really not much time spent on developing what exactly you can do with these, but that's, take it or leave it. For me, I'm okay with that. It means that I may have to hit the old Google machine at some point and then just kind of make a ruling on it. But again, this is not trying to be entirely realistic. I would say that you could definitely strive for a sort of immersion, but you'd have to understand that this is, like I said, kind of focusing on folklore rather than nitty-gritty details. Now, you could absolutely do whatever you want with this system, and I think that would work fine if you were to focus on something else that's a little bit more realistic or something like that. But that just is not really the intent here. So secondary values, this is just where you take all that stuff that you've chosen so far, and then you apply it to fill in the rest of your sheets. That's how you get your armor class. So you have a default of 10. You can get some bonus from your chest piece. You can get a bonus from shield or arm bracers or a parrying dagger. There is a lot of description as to what is appropriate for the time period and from what cultures, and I do really appreciate that. So here are your saving throw types, and I will describe this just because they are different. At least the name is different. So bravery includes physical endurance, poison and disease resistance, as well as the ability to stand against fear. It is modified by constitution. So I mean, it's basically your your poison save for the most part. Deafness is, well, other than the fear part. Deafness, it includes reaction, quick dodging, etc. It is modified by dexterity. That was fairly obvious. Temptation. So this is kind of your save verse spells, your wisdom, that kind of thing. It includes the ability to defy temptation, but also to tempt God through recklessness and sheer human willpower. It is modified by wisdom. And again, there are a lot of great things here where he just goes through how all this stuff works just to make sure you understand it. It takes up pages, yes, but it's useful in my opinion. So with the equipment, it's very simple. There is a chance, so you just roll 2d6 to see how much gold you start with. And it does use different names for gold. You have thames, I think I'm going to pronounce them wrong, and I apologize. There's Flemings? Flemings? Let's see. Oh, it's okay. All right. Hold on. A Pfennig, or a, what was the first one? A groschen. Yeah, a groschen. And there are different ones based on different areas, but it just kind of boils them down into, well, the gold piece is called the thame usually, or the tame, or whatever, and etc. So it does have gold, silver, copper, and it's very easy to work in. So there is a lot of time just going through, like I said, the kinds of equipment and things like that they used in the time. And that even includes dress, which I really appreciate. So you have 2 pages of just information on weapons and armor, miscellaneous equipment. And one of the things that you'll see here is that there's a coding system for what these weapons can do. So for instance, your pick has 2 on it. So you go down. 2 is two-handed, giving a 1.5 plus strength bonus to damage. You have a lot of different notes. There's one that can be knockout damage. That definitely includes wrestling. There's armor piercing, so that is for like the S stock or anything that's made to pierce armor. You have firearms, so if people have a problem with firearms, well, it's contemporary for the period. I'm sorry, 17th to 18th century Switzerland. So just deal with it. If you don't like it, sorry. You can take it out, I guess, whenever you run it, because you are the boss. The equipment list is pretty thorough. The prices, all that stuff is there. And here you have also some hiring people in the last page. I kind of skipped that on a per week basis. Then you have how much are animals, how much are vehicles. We do have war dogs for a relatively cheap price, sort of, not really, but kind of. They are kind of expensive, comparatively speaking. I like to say, okay, war dog is 3 thames. Let's see how much a sword is. Sword is 2, about 2 or 3. Long sword is 5. So it's cheaper than a long sword, which it's fine, but I'm going to have flashbacks to my games with people with tons of war dogs, but that's neither here nor there. So then you have this step-by-step of how to create your character, which again, I appreciate it summing it all up like that, because whenever I first went through it, I was like, okay, I'm getting this, but I feel like I'm going to have to reread this again to try and grasp the exact everything in order. And there it was. So descriptions of the 7 virtues and 7 cardinal sins. You generate you roll 3d6 to determine what your starting virtue is. And if you are a Calvinist, so it does have religions in here. It has the main church, it has the Calvinists, and it has the Jewish faith. And I think it has some others as well. But those are the main ones that I've seen talked about in here. And with the Calvinists, because they believe in predestination, it's kind of funny, because what you do is you have their starting virtue roll, and then whatever side they're on, they're more likely to go in that direction whenever they do something. So if let's say that they're predisposed to have high virtue, then if they sin, then yeah, they get the normal sin. But if they do something virtuous, they get an extra point, which I think is really just kind of funny. There's a lot of little things in here like that I think are just really inventive. So you have a description of what those virtues and vices are. in case anybody didn't know. And then what are some examples of a virtue that will gain you a point? And that is giving food to the hungry, something like that. And a lot of times, we do stuff like that in role playing games, and it's not really reinforced in any way. This is something that is you're reinforced for pretty much whatever you do, which I think is pretty cool. You have them write down whenever they sin because they're going to have the points for that, and then whenever they do confessional, at least that's the way I'm understanding it. There's a chance where they can wipe away some of the sin, or at least some of the points. But so it goes from 1 to 6, 6 being the absolute worst or best thing that you can do, and then 1 being just kind of mild, basically. In either direction, just you stole somebody's property, you looted the dead, that kind of thing. So again, you're not going to play like a normal adventure in D&D. You're not going to loot the dead all the time. You're not going to leave people out to rot, probably. At least you shouldn't. You may be shunned for it. But at the same time, you are going to sin. You're going to sin. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. That's just what and I do really appreciate that. We have some guidance here for how absolution works. You can't just confess anywhere. You have to go to the church, and you can go to mass, or you can do some great deeds or things like that. But basically what it says is that you can't get a point for every sin that you confess at one time. You get a point for doing a thorough confession. And then all of those things have been confessed. You can't just confess again. So yeah, there's, like I said, most of the stuff, there's a lot of really good guidance in this thing. So here's that bit about Calvinist virtue and how that works. And then there's more description on how that's supposed to work with Judaism. And then we get to the combat rules. Now, the combat rules, like I said, they're very familiar. They're very simple. So it has surprise listed here as the first thing that you determine. There's no mechanic for how to do that. So do with it what you will. I know what I'll probably do, and that is basically the same thing I always do. Very descriptive. And then once it gets to a point where if there's a question, like if they were traveling and, it's not where we're doing this very direct, I'm describing everything that you encounter kind of thing. You didn't, do like a whatever, then I'll just roll a d6 and I'll choose what, how probable is it that you were surprised, and vice versa. But that's not listed here, so that is maybe a knock, perhaps. Initiative is very simple. It's individual initiative. You roll your d20, add your dexterity, and if you are a particular kind of vagabond, then you get a +4 bonus to it. And then you move and you do your action. Move and do your action. That's it. You do your movement, you attack. You can do combat checks. Now, combat checks, that's pretty cool, I think. It's kind of in the same vein as like mighty deeds and things like that. But the whole idea is that you can do checks in the middle of combat to see if you do something really cool. And again, that's kind of going in with the swashbuckling of the Three Musketeers, the picaresque kind of stuff, is just having it where they can make those checks and try cool stuff. And it could be a lot of different things. And it kind of has a back and forth quality to it. Now, so what you do with combat checks is you'll apply the appropriate skill that's involved, and you have to make a roll. And if it's non-contested, then of course you use the normal spectrum. If it's contested, then basically if you succeed by 5 or more, then you succeed. If you beat what they roll by 5 or more, then you succeed. If you don't, if you're within that range of 5, then that means that you tied. And nothing really happens. That means that they can turn the tables on you. And if you completely, utterly fail and they succeed, then they get to react in kind. So I think that that's a really cool way of handling things. I like it. You have ready to actions, you have delaying, you have refocusing. So you can spend a full round in preparation. be able to act first in the next round if you like, that kind of thing. So you get a little bit of choice as far as what you're going to be doing within the initiative. So reloading is going to it's quicker than I would like, because, but then again, this is not trying to be super realistic, whatever, because of the fact that, you know, around in here, I believe it's 6 seconds. Let me see. It's 6 seconds whenever you're just doing a normal fight. And it has different framing based on the size of the fight. And I really appreciate that it has rules in here for different scales of fighting. So you can reload in a round and a half if you are using like a muzzle loader, which to me, I think, you know, it is what it is. But he still kind of says more than likely you're probably going to shoot 2 pistols and then pull out a sword, more than likely. But that is a thing. So there is a touch attack, which, you know, some BX style games don't have. And it's simple. It's just, you just don't apply the armor bonus. There are critical hits. So whenever you roll a natural 20, or there's some weapons that you can roll within a certain range. But for the most part, it's a natural 20. Then what you do is you re-roll again. And then if you meet their AC or exceed it again, then it's confirmed and you do double damage or triple damage or quadruple damage, depending on the weapon. And if you roll a 20 twice, and then you also hit on the third one, then it's an instant kill, which I think is really cool that it's there. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. There are critical failures. 20s always succeed. That is explicit in the system here. And again, it's not realistic necessarily, but I mean, that's not really what it's going for. It is wanting you to have some crazy stuff happen. Knockout damage, it's really just as simple as saying you intend to do it. You do have a penalty to hit if depending on the weapon. Some weapons are not suited for knocking people out. So you can only use 1 spell per round, regardless of the round's length, spell level, or any other circumstances. If you're wounded, tackled, or otherwise disturbed before their turn, they must roll a successful temptation saving throw on their attempt or lose the spell without effect. So that is kind of an indication that you need to announce spells first, even though I don't remember it actually saying that you need to do that. What else? So you have flight and pursuit rules. And now that I'm here, I'm starting to think I actually might have skipped that part. But there are rules for it. There are rules for surrendering. And surrendering is something that is actually not suicide, really. A lot of times, well, depends on what you're fighting. But basically, if you're fighting people and you surrender, then they are not going to kill you, usually. They are usually not going to kill you. And you are expected to not kill them if they surrender. It's cultural. You know, if you're getting somebody and you know you were fighting with them and they surrender, then you disarm them. You knock them out. You strip them if you're feeling kind of saucy, and then you just leave them on the side of the road, and just, you know, whatever. And then there's a feud going. That's the kind of stuff that happens with this game. It's not good to just kill them and just leave them out to die. So another running of how combat works, there are special combat situations. So you can have mounted combats, you can have bad weapons, you can have trying to evade fire. Now the larger army stuff I really appreciate. It's kind of funny because what he does here is something that it's kind of similar to what I did for whenever I was trying to handle mass combat in my early DMing days. And that is that basically he just boosts the scale of what a what a unit is within the fight to 10, or 1 to 10, or you could do 1 to 100, really whatever you need to do. And there are rules here on how to handle it, and they're very simple. And then even greater than that, if you need to have a siege, by God, you have siege rules. And it's all basically handled like a combat. It's very straightforward. It seems competent. I haven't tried it, but I like it. I like the idea that you could handle that, something like that. You could have it as a facet in the game without having it take too long or be too complicated. So I've already covered the magic and faith section just by yapping a great deal. So one of the things as far as components goes for the student is that the student can make or find a lot of them, and that is necessary with a lot of them because, like for instance, the spell I was talking about where you liquefy their lungs, you have to get the lungs out of a dead body. You have to get the lungs of someone who was an alcoholic, basically, who was just always drinking. Or no, they died of consumption. Something else entirely. My bad. I was misremembering. Or like for the fireball spell, as it's described, that you need the fingers of a hanged man, or something of that variety. And those you actually have to go and get. But there are some things that are a little bit more straightforward, and you can buy them if you're in a city. Otherwise, you might have to make them yourself. And again, the students are relying on that. But are they so reliant on that as they are in BX? Are they so reliant on spells? Not really. Not really. The spells are very useful and they're very cool, and a lot of them are very different than normal D&D stuff. But your all of your characters are going to know how to fight. And I think that that is something that a lot of people will appreciate, because a lot of people don't like the squishy magic user that runs out of spells and then you're done. I think that it's perfectly fine, because that is just how you play that style of game. This is a different style of game, in my personal opinion. So you have the rules of magic here. There's some stuff here that you should probably look at. So I do appreciate that as far as distance goes, again, it's not trying to be too fiddly. So it's just like, we're not worried about exact feet or anything like that. It's just you're at arm's length. You're in so you're either in touch range, you're in short range, you're in medium range, you're in long range, and it's really kind of abstracted. So you have some information here as to how you can incorporate, actually how it is part of the game, the Devil's Bible and the Holy Bible, which is interesting. I will say it's interesting. So the whole thing about the Bible here is that if you're, let's say you have a character that's off doing something by themselves for some reason, and they get into a pickle, then there is a chance that they can recite from Holy Scripture and have a miracle happen. And they don't even have to be a cleric. They do not even have to be a cleric. They just have to be virtuous in some capacity. If they have low virtue, then they can only do it once per adventure. If they have medium, then they can do it twice. And if they have high, then they can do it 3 times. So, and if you belong to, a different religion, then you use whatever it is from that scripture. The Devil's Bible is a different story. The Devil's Bible, to me, is probably one of the most fascinating things that he included in this game, because it really changes things. And I know that the players are going to want to do it. So here's what it is. That pack of cards that I showed last time, which I have in the box in the back room. Shame on me for not bringing it out. But what you do is, let's say that you're in a pickle and you really need some help, and your character has a deck of cards on them. Then they can basically try and invoke the devil in order to assist them. And so the way that works is they choose either 1, 2, or 3 cards. If they choose 1 card, then what that will do is that will help them in a very, very slight way that's almost unnoticeable, but can help them get out of a situation. If they choose 2 cards, then it's something that is clearly something kind of supernatural, and it may be a little bit more obvious, but it's still subtle enough to get away with. And if they choose 3 cards, then it is all out there that clearly there's some devil work afoot, but you can get out of the stickiest of situations. Now, the thing is that what you do is whenever you do it, the GM is going to be handed 3 cards from the player. That's if you're sitting at the table. This could be a little bit harder to simulate online. At least what I would do is I would probably bring in a camera at that point. If at all possible, just to show that you're not, as a GM, you're not being deceptive or anything like that. I do believe in transparency, but, I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust your GM. But anyway, what they have to do is they have to hope that those 3 cards that are drawn do not exceed 21 points. And you have on here exactly how the points work. So there are some specific things here for special cards, but for the most part, aces are 11 points. Numbers are at point value. Kings are 4 points. Over is 3 points. Under is 2 points. So it's not too hard for someone to end up with 21 points by pulling 3 cards. It's very, very, very dangerous for them to do that. The description that they use for what that might look like using 3 cards is, so basically the 3 cards would be if you had somebody who was trying to do a getaway, and so they're looking out a window. They draw the 3 cards, and then suddenly a gigantic black cat starts running over and hides under, gets under the window for you to jump down on and to ride to safety. That, and of course, everybody's going to see that and they're going to be like, oh my God, devil work, and that's the kind of stuff that happens there. So what happens after that? Happens after that is they have to meet with the devil at the crossroads, and then he's going to flip the cards. There is another thing that you can do, though. The player can choose, if they have a pretty amazing gambling skill, that's where that comes in, to switch one of the cards before the devil draws it. And if they can do that, they can try and peek at the card, and then they can try and switch it. So they can cheat the devil. They can prevent themselves from having that awful outcome, because what happens if they go at 21 or higher is their soul is basically forfeit. They may be sent off to do some kind of terrible thing for the devil, that kind of stuff. I think it's a really cool system, the way that works. I think it's really creative. You're not actually sitting there playing poker with the devil or anything like that. There have been some things that recommended stuff like that, and it's like nobody wants to sit at the table and play a whole ass card game. This is just quick and done. Most of the gambling is before the cards are even brought out. So I really appreciate that. I think it's a really cool thing. I'm going to try and figure out a little bit more about how this part works. I think that I think I just didn't quite grasp that. I'm going to have to reread that part. So then you have measurements. You have measurements for travel distances and stuff like that. And he has this kind of tongue-in-cheek description about how the way that it's done in this place is just much better than anywhere else. So you have measurements such as a pound, a load, a foot, 10 feet. You have a stund, perhaps, which is basically it's 5 kilometers, and that's the daily travel movements along in, so all that kind of stuff. So you have the travel distances, you have just how the what travel is like and all that kind of stuff. I already kind of went over this a little bit, how if a character gets separated from the party and lost, then they roll on this chart, and they want to try and not roll low because they're dead if they roll low. So you want to have them stick together if at all possible. But also, if the whole group is just hopelessly lost, then you would do the same thing for the whole group and then hope that they get there. Languages are learned by being immersed in the culture. and it just takes time. I really like that, you know. So it kind of speaks to the idea that you may be playing a campaign for a long time, even though it's an episodic one. And so you may be like, well, y'all been spending like a month in France, and so you've really picked up a lot of the native tongue or something. Um, Hospices, most people are going to be able to get plenty of rest. So then we're going to go into spells. I'm not going to read all the spells, but you can at least see kind of how it works. Whenever, so you have 60 different spells included here. Actually, I'm sorry, 120 spells. And most of them have their own names, like brand new names. Some of them don't, but several of them do, and a lot of them are very different. And I think that that's all I'm going to cover today, because I was mostly wanting to cover just the concept and the spells in the game. Or not spells, I'm sorry, the concept and the basic mechanics. So what that is going to mean is that next time we're going to go over the setting in more detail. We've got a decent bit of setting material. We've got monsters, stuff like that. When can you expect for me to complete this? I'm not really sure. We are planning on going on a trip next weekend, and I'm going to try and do what I can in the evenings. I'm very interested in this. Like, I just kind of sat down and absorbed this material in very large bursts because I found it incredibly enjoyable to read. So, you know, if you're interested in it, go check it out. I think it's really cool. There is no PDF out now that I'm familiar with. I don't think that there is a PDF. So if you want to get it, you got to buy the hard copy, as far as I know. I've heard something about perhaps September is when a PDF might come out. And that is one thing that I kind of lament, is no PDF, because most of my old school online gaming, it happens online. And that means that I would have to ask everyone to buy a $40 hardcover with shipping, which the shipping is very expensive. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is not a cheap transaction. And the box set is $60. If you ask me, the box set is very worth it if you can get reasonable shipping. So that is it for today. I hope that this was instructive. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you have any questions for me to ask the author whenever I get him on. I'm probably going to try and get him on after I have finished reading this and finished reading Castles in Tillin. And that way I can give a lot of informative questions and things like that. He also has a lot of other stuff. He's got a zine. It's called, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it looks like good stuff just from what I've seen, and I've heard great things. So I'm kind of a fan at this point. If the rest of his work is as high quality as this right here, then I'm a fan. So anyway, y'all have a good one, and peace out.